Welcome to the Imposter Syndrome Club. I'm Alice and I'm joined as always by Jessamy. Hello, Jess.
Hey, Alice. How you going?
I'm so good. Always amazing to see you and very, very excited for the conversation we're going to have this evening with Rhys. Welcome to the Imposter Syndrome Club.
Thank you so much and very big congratulations on number 50.
Thanks.
Number 50. What an honour. What an honour.
50.
I didn't even know as soon as I walked in. Like, number 50. I was like, oh, well.
And we couldn't be more excited. We couldn't have picked a better guest than you, Mr. Rhys Paddick. So
It's a big statement.
you got to live up to it now.
Did you hear that? Everybody else after me?
We're going to hold you to it. So, Rhys, the way that this podcast starts, as you know, is that we ask our guests to read their own bio. So would you indulge us, please?
Okay, this is my LinkedIn bio because they've got so many different bios. I've got my website bio, my MySpace bio and all the things.
Your MySpace bio. He's also a time traveller.
It's me as a 15-year-old bio. You don't want to read that one.
I really want to read that.
No, you don't.
This podcast is taking a hard left turn and I love it.
Okay, so here's my LinkedIn one because
right.
it's very professional.
Professional.
Rhys Paddick. How do I clear my throat? People Cultures, Australian Forum, Aboriginal Perspectives. Okay. Yamaji Budimaya Noongar Australian, co-founder and director, acknowledge this. I'm an expert in cultural desensitivity. How to explore and connect with Aboriginal peoples and cultures with courage, excitement and joy, as opposed to facilitating cultural change from the all too common place of shame, guilt and fear. I specialise in moving people and businesses out of ticking boxes into a place of authenticity. As a storyteller and artist, I take from my 15 plus years of working with and for Aboriginal people and organisations and have designed and delivered multiple workshops, trainings and keynotes, all in an effort to connect our fellow Australians to our common cultures. Anything else, it's always a conversation and I love to yarn. Then I put my email, then I put my website, very, very official there.
All your official bits and pieces. Oh, thank you, Rhys.
You're very welcome.
I was lucky enough to attend one of your Acknowledge This workshops a few years ago. We were trying to work it out earlier. And I love the way that you speak about coming from a place of joy rather than a place of fear, because I think a lot of this stuff, it's so heavy and not without good reason, right? Like there's a lot of heaviness that sits in the parts of the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. But the fear around that can be so fucking paralysing that we end up either doing nothing or overcooking it to the point where it becomes meaningless.
You nailed it. Yeah, you nailed it.
So help us. What do we do?
All right, how much time you got? 1 hour. All right. You got to be more specific. You got to be like, give me like a point of reference here.
Okay, so I'll use us as an example, right? So basically since we started the podcast.
For 50 episodes.
Including
this very episode, I might add.
And I would actually be interested in your opinion on this as a thing in general, that quite a lot of podcasts now have an acknowledgement at the start of the podcast. And we're like, shoot, that's something we should probably really do. And then we're like, oh, but let's not do like a standard like box tick, blah, blah thing that we just record and play at the start of everyone. Let's actually do it at the start of every episode. And then exactly like I just said, we overcooked it, we overthought it, we got paralysed. And now 50 episodes in, have we done one acknowledgement of country?
We have not.
No. How dare you, first of all?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, but that's like the cultural reaction, right? So here's the thing. It's like there's almost like this cultural like expectation or standard of like doing the thing, right? In this case, the acknowledgement of country. So like you said, like it's something that you think we should be doing. Now, my question is, and how I frame this is I'm like, why is that important to you? Now, I think that's really important. I think people don't really ask themselves that question enough, or they say like, why is that important to you? Now, oftentimes people come back with like the answer of like, oh, because, it's a respectful thing to do. And I go, yeah, okay, well, like externally it is, like, sure. And like that can be good enough. But I'm more interested in like why it would be important to you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, in a lot of ways, like people can go, oh, well, because it's important to me because of, X, Y, and Z. And I go, okay, well, like that's where I would start, like in writing down or constructing the words that are not, you're not coming from the point of like, here's the words I think I have to say. here's the words that I think here's the words that I know that are important to me. And then when you put that down, it's like just apply the context of like the traditional, you know what I mean? So that it's like specifically location-wise, you could say something about being on Wurundjeri country here, in Nam or in Melbourne, Wominjeka, you know. So like you sort of can add on the layer of context, but what sits beyond just the words is your genuine intention or like your genuine words. Like start there, you know what I mean?
It's such a good question because I think if I'm completely honest, the reason like why in terms of this context was like, well, other people are doing it and we're going to look like dickheads if we don't. That's the honest reason that would have been driving us towards doing it.
And it's like good on you for getting there because a lot of people don't like to get there.
Yeah.
A lot of people like to just be in the facade or the mask of like, no, but it is respectful.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other side of it because when we've spoken about it and this idea of pre-recording something for us felt really icky because it felt then performative only, and that was not what we wanted to do, which is exactly the point of this conversation and hopefully that we can workshop together. And I love thinking on what you just said about the why. And again, this is me just sort of thinking out loud, but kind of this question around, this is workshopping in real time, but like with this podcast, right, our intention is to create a place where people feel that they belong, right? Like in the messy process of life, particularly creative life, like it's just to know that other people are also trying, other people are also fucking up. We're all scared, we're all afraid, but we're all kind of here for each other. And that maybe that in some way connecting to the idea of place and the idea of belonging might be a place where we could authentically start to think about what it means to belong in a place, what it means to visit, what it means to welcome. Would that be a way to think?
You already got it.
About it?
Like yes, like so yes.
Okay.
Right? So like you've already got it, and it's like that. It's like take that. Right. And if you want to workshop it later, it's like just take that segment, start there, and then do exactly what you just said, and then go contextually, what's the traditional element that I can play with that reference it as the acknowledgement of country as opposed to it just being about my intention? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like I play with both. So I'm like, my intention is X and then the traditional context is Y and then X and Y equals Z. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just made that analogy up.
Can I? So can I even backtrack us just a tiny, tiny bit because there's so much there and that we'd love to get into. But as a non-Australian in the room, as a South African coming from a land with plenty of colonialist shit and pain and trauma, I arrived in Australia 5 years ago and I'd never heard of what a welcome to country was or an acknowledgement of country. And I think it would be really nice to just chat through right at the beginning, like what even this is, because for non-Aussies listening, this is a completely foreign. I mean, the first time I heard one, I was amazed and I just thought, my God, this is incredible. I'm with the most progressive group ever. And they literally did like the read the script one. And I was like, whoa, this is incredible. And then the next few events I worked at, I was like, oh, this is like a thing, right? So could you just chat about like what is an acknowledgement of country? What is a welcome to country?
An acknowledgement of country is simply at the core, like beyond the politics, just at the very core, is just an acknowledgement of people and place. Okay. A welcome to country is specifically a traditional cultural protocol, right? And this is something that is generally conducted or delivered by our elders or sometimes people with the right permission from those elders of a specific place. Okay, now I give an analogy in my training, and I don't know if you remember this one about the house analogy. I also remember you guys came to my training a long time ago, right? But this is the analogy here, right? So it's like, think of a welcome to country like this, you know? In the modern sense, if I was to come over to your house today, right, knock at your door, you open the door just like you did, you know, you're performing a welcome to country, okay? You're the traditional owner of that place, okay? You might be the traditional renter, I'm not sure. You know? But
oh, no,
you see what I'm getting at, right?
Yeah.
But see, there's like cultural protocols that you're unconsciously doing, right? Your welcome to country is like, hey, Rhys, how you doing? Like you gave me a hug on the way in. Like that's a part of you. Some people, even when I was at the other house, when I was knocking on the other door because I didn't know which house you were at.
Sorry about that.
I noticed that they had a traditional protocol. It was written right there. It was like, make sure your shoes are off. You know what I mean? So like there's traditional protocols, right? And you come in and you invite me in, you say, Rhys, would you like a strawberry? You know, you want this? Like, come meet my dogs. Like you announced to me your country's traditional totems, really, didn't you? You know what I mean?
Yes, chichi and pickle. Yeah.
Right. So you're the one welcoming me to country, right? Gotcha. Now in this analogy, what's the acknowledgement of country, right? That's just how I, as the visitor, simply respond or articulate my appreciation for being in this space at that time, right? That's me just saying, oh, Jessamy, hey, good to see you, man. Finally in person, right? Like, amazing. Like, oh, like, what a beautiful place you got here. I love, I was mentioning your art on the wall.
Yeah.
Just me by announcing that is connecting people and place, right? Which, again, is what the acknowledgement is all about, right?
Yeah.
Now, today, culturally speaking, the acknowledgement and welcome to country is funny. It's funny, right? Because really what's happening is, like, I'm knocking at the door. Jessamy here's opening the door. She said, hey, Rhys, welcome, come on in. I said, hang on a sec, Jessamy. Good evening, Jessamy. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I'm entering your place of residence. I'd like to acknowledge the tenants that have come before you. And it's like, all right, well, that's respectful.
So
like you're not going to be like, how dare, like you're going to be like, yeah, but it's like, I don't think we need that.
Yeah.
I think we can just kind of, you know?
Such a great analogy.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Straight away. Yeah. Yeah. And like you say, it's not offensive because it's well intentioned and it's
natural.
It is an acknowledgement, but to actually use your words and show up as a human will feel real rather than the scripted version.
I think so. Yeah.
It's a great image.
The word that you use in your bio, Rhys, was it cultural desensitivity? I love that.
I just made it up.
I love it. Yeah. I love it. So in that sort of like, and this isn't related to imposter syndrome as such, but certainly like feeling like an imposter, I think part of that like fear and sensitivity is around like getting it wrong, obviously, offending people. But there also seems to be a sort of like, well, who am I to do? Like, who am I to, I don't know, like even if you think of like you were talking about finding something that's personal to you and then relating it, see how you could relate it to something traditional.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Like, so even if you're going there and then you're maybe doing a bit more research or whatever, but then you're like, oh, but then I'm standing up in front of people and I'm presenting a thing that I feel like's placing me as some sort of expert, but I'm not an expert. And you know what? Just fuck it. I'll just read the thing as it was written because it becomes too scary. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how have you found people have found success in navigating that feeling of like, it's not my place to do this?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. Hang on. I got a few answers. I'm just trying to think like what's a good way to approach this. I call myself a desensitivity expert because I like the idea of empowering or encouraging people to empower themselves to find their own courage within, right? And I think people are kind of, culturally speaking, are too sensitive, and that's kind of having the opposite effect. So when people are standing there going like, do I say Aboriginal or Indigenous or First Nations? I go, okay, thank you for being, I can see your intention is obviously like that of respectful, but also it's like what is in here is better than I think what's going on in here right now, you know? And I sort of encourage people to take the risk to actually like just be a little bit more courageous. That's why I say it's like desensitize the already sort of too sensitive nature that's around us, right? So then when you say like, when have I seen somebody like successful in this, it's when it's really less of an external sense of success and more like when people find their own courage within to just be able to say words that are meaningful to them in here, not up here. The more they do that, the more risk there is, but it's like life means risk anyway. Like, you know, you can't de-risk everything 100% all the time, but what you can do is step into your own genuine intentions and you've got a 99% success rate anyway, you know, like that's what people forget, like just by being able to step into themselves and try something new. So I think that's the best way I can explain it, when people find that within themselves, not from something I teach, but something I encourage.
Yeah.
You know? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I'm interested, like, because it's that interesting type of fear where if you follow it, you're like, well, what would actually happen if I did like get it? Like what, and this is a genuine question, like what is actually the worst thing that can happen?
Oh.
Like is there actually any horrific consequence? Like is someone going to come and like steal your ally card? Like what the, you know, but genuinely, like what are there potential consequences of getting it wrong?
I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and it's like, I don't know, I cannot identify where the wrong part is in getting it wrong.
Yeah, this is what I'm trying to work out.
Because that's what I'm saying. Like you can't, like somebody, because everybody's different, right?
Yeah.
Somebody will say, you're doing it wrong because you said Aboriginal and not Indigenous. But then somebody else simultaneously says, no, you're getting it wrong because you said Indigenous, not Aboriginal. That's what I mean. You can't please everyone.
Yeah.
Getting it wrong could mean like, oh, you're getting it wrong because like we're in like a room, we're in a place with like 10 speakers and like every single speaker is doing one. I call this the dominoing effect. Yeah,
oh boy, do we see that a lot.
And it's like, is that wrong? But the thing is that there's not like, you know, I make this joke in my training as well. It's like people need to hear it. There is not a secret cabal of elders that are reviewing and judging every single acknowledgement. I think people think there is.
It kind of like that's
it
the
feels
feeling.
like it.
Yeah.
So it feels like, yeah, I mean, I get it, right? And especially for me, it's like that fear's turned up because I'm the Aboriginal guy doing the thing.
Sure, yeah.
Cultural, you know. So I go like, people think it's like to get it wrong, but nobody can ever define what that really is. So I'm like, well, why not? Because you're always going to get it wrong to someone.
Yeah.
But I reckon you're only ever going to get it right to yourself. That's the point.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And I suppose it's that idea as well. Firstly, I love just that question is great. Like what is wrong? Like getting it wrong, what would that even be is great. But also the idea that fixating on that is fixating on how you come across, which is missing. If we go back to earlier when you said this idea of the work of connecting people in place, which is looking outwards, right? Like you're looking to the people you're with, you're looking to the place you're in. Worrying about getting it wrong is looking inwards. Like you're no longer even thinking about the people you're with. You're not thinking about the land that you're on. You're thinking about you and your insecurities and how you look, which we are all fucking guilty of. Like I'm putting my hand up as like the first person who, you know, we can get in these cycles of kind of like spotlight effect and thinking that you said, the cabal of elders, like there are way better things, if they did exist, have way better things to do with their time than be in like your middle management meeting.
100%. And it creates a sense of irony then, right? Because then you're going, I would like to pay respects to these people. And I'm like, so who are these people to you then? Other than like a concept that exists. You know what I mean? That's why it's like, it's like, I pay respects to the elders. I'm like, do you know any elders? You know what I mean? So it's like, again, but people do that thing where it's like, it's the safe zone, it's the respectful thing to do. And that seems to be good enough to get it over the line of now becoming a cultural phenomenon. You know?
Yeah. So what then would be a better way to think about that? If we kind of go back to the first part of the question being, so why are we doing this? And this, what you said about connecting people in place. So what is the next sort of step, or what should people be thinking of, or where do you take people after that question?
After the why question? So you've asked yourself the question, why do I do it? You've come to your own answer. Then where do we go from there?
Yeah.
I think about it like, okay, so I would say, and we're talking specifically acknowledgements, right?
Yeah, we can start there and build up. Yeah.
I'm thinking like you found some sense of internal appreciation and gratitude for the people in place that you're around and you live in, and you go, okay, that's, so you at your core, it's like, okay, it's meaningful to me. Good, great, let's start there. From there, that's when I'm like, now let's play with like, what is it in the traditional sense in the place that you're in that you can find that you can now use, that it's like the next level, it's the next step to your foundation of your intention, right? So in my mind, it's like, I like the idea. It's fun for me to go to different places and to learn about the traditional cultures of that place. And that can be very simple. Like you don't have to go and read the entire dictionary and find out the entire colonial history. And then like, I'm just like, find what is hello here? I want to know that, right? So if I was to be acknowledging country here, I got off the plane here a couple, 2 hours ago or something like that. And I'm like, but there's an opportunity for me to go, who's here and how is that meaningful to me, right? Now, I love this country here because this woman Jeka is commonly referred to as welcome. So people say, hey, did you know that in the local Wurundjeri language, Wominjeka is welcome? And I go, oh, that's beautiful. Like now you've taught me something new in your acknowledgement about the place that is important to you, and 99% of the time is going to be important to me by like osmosis. And then I'm like, but you can keep finding out more, because a lot of people just stop there. They go, oh, it means welcome. And then like, cool, done. I'm like, no, keep going, man. It's you'll find more fun things if you look more into it, because then like you split up the language, right? So Aboriginal language is funny because a lot of people have this top-down approach. They go, Wominjeka means welcome. And you go, cool, accurate. But if you go the other way around and you start splitting up the syllables, it starts to reveal different contextual meanings. So like, okay, I'm going to butcher this, so I'm sorry any Wurundjeri people listening, right? Okay, butcher this a little bit. But it was like Wom, Min, Deka. So there's kind of like 3 parts to that. And it more, if you translate it from the bottom up, it's like to come with purpose.
Wow.
And that's way sexier than welcome.
Yeah.
Welcome everyone. No, but to come with purpose, that invokes intention. So when I say Wominjeka, if I'm on this country, it's like I'm embodying the meaning of the core construct of the word, because I'm here with purpose. So I say Wominjeka, not just like, well, because I can't welcome you, but I can come with purpose.
Yeah.
So and it's like, okay, I kind of go off because I get really excited with language.
Oh, like, please, any and all. You're in the right crowd here, Rhys. Yeah.
But I'm giving examples because to come back to your question of like, what then? Like, okay, I've found a good intention within. What then? I go have fun with it, man. Go find out and find something that's interesting, valuable, fun to you, and then share it. Share it around, and that can be the opportunity of the acknowledgement beyond just the words that you say in a respectful setting before the thing. Because otherwise it's just housekeeping.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that idea of fun, which is obviously something that like is really at your core and like permeates through all of the work that you do.
That's why I'm drinking this water.
Yeah.
That's why I'm watching right now.
Yeah.
Cheers.
But I think it's also like there was something I read on your website around sort of like connecting culture, so we don't think of them as such separate things. Oh, yeah. So we've got sort of like a real like us and them thing. And I think that's where acknowledgements often go down that road where they become, and sometimes it's appropriate to be heavy and serious depending on the context in which you're talking, I imagine as well. But I think what that does is sort of further separates, right? Because then we're talking about a kind of a history of two parts. But if you're bringing that sort of that fun, curious level where you're investigating language, investigating the place that you're in, I don't know. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm going down the wrong path here, Rhys. But I imagine that probably starts making it feel more like, oh, we're all here.
Yeah.
Like this is part of all of our collective history, and it can be fun to learn rather than talk about all of the horrific history, which is important to address, but maybe I don't know.
No,
am I making sense? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
There's so many angles I can go over.
Yeah,
I get it, and I get it. That's why like, so I'll do it again in my bio, because I think this is kind of relevant and important to how I explain things. So I have to read my own bio again.
Yeah.
But I just want to make
This
sure
is a 50th episode pod first. Like normally people just try get the bio like done as soon as possible and throw their phone in the river. Rhys is going in for round 2. I love it.
We're going to go through every word, and we're going to just no, we're not. I say people cultures. So Rhys Paddick, people cultures, Australian Forum, Aboriginal perspectives. Okay. So it's like, you could say I'm an Aboriginal cultural awareness trainer. You could say that because that's true, but more so I'm invested in people culture.
Yeah.
Right? I do this in an Australian forum, and I do it through Aboriginal perspectives, which are valuable and meaningful to me, right? So yes, there is, and this is the constant, I don't like to use the word battle, but I do like, maybe it's perspectives is the better word, where people go, everyone's tribalism's a thing, right? And it's kind of natural, like in the human sense, where we do this thing where we add the labels to who we are, and then we do this on like every single level, right? You can do it as like, I'm an Eagles supporter, you're a Dockers supporter. What do you mob do here in over the East? You do rugby more than AFL, eh?
AFL, right? but wrong crowd for sport chat. Sorry.
Okay. And me too. I don't know sports at all. I'm just giving an example. Okay, so but again, it's funny because like, okay, so find the labels, right? Let's and then we add the labels. So it's like I'm an X supporter, and then you go, all right, religion. I'm a religion, and then you go, all right, I'm this color, and then I'm like this race, and I'm like this thing, and again, they serve us until they don't.
Yeah.
Right. It's like they're good because we're social animals. Like we need to be are part of something that and have a label for it and have a construct towards it, whether it's biological, independent, community related, that's important because that's who we are. But at the same time, I try to use it lightly because it's like you're also a lot of other things as well.
Yeah.
And also one label is oftentimes defined differently between people of the same label, which gets very difficult. You know, nobody can define white. Nobody can define it. Really, they can't. You can't look it in the dictionary. People get angry when you go, I'm like, are Italians white? Are Cubans white? And people go, yes and no. And I'm like, exactly. I'm like, it's good until it's not, right?
Yeah.
So this is where I go that culture is very important because that's kind of the swimming pool that we're all in. And I go like, what is specifically like valuable and relevant to us, and how do we do more of that together as opposed to only ever keeping it like an us versus them relationship of like, I am paying respects to their elders. I like to use our elders, for example, because I'm like, the concept of an elder is universal. You know what I mean? But again, it's not a wrong thing. If you say their elders, I'm going to say, well, hey, my ancestors bless you for specifically referencing that. But again, I like the idea where we can find more of the similarities through us culturally than the differences, which everybody seems to be focused on, where all the fear seems to be shrouded around, where all the politics lie. I just go, cool, that's all important. Like you said, all the history is important, all the things important. And it's like, but what can we do that we forget works really well? And how do we do that more?
And I think to what you were saying before, Jess, like that feels like the role of the joy and the excitement is that when you feel those feelings around people, you want to be with them more, you want to be closer to them, you feel safer, you're more vulnerable.
Yeah.
So it's joy and connection and fun is also a strategic tool. Like it's not just it's not just fluffy extras, it's not copping out. It's important. It does important work.
I feel like what you just said is like what all the corporate world needs to know. And what I'm trying to they're like, I'm not even kidding. I got my in my contracts, I'm like hiring staff now and stuff. In the contract, it's very specific. It's like, here's your role, but in there is like, have fun.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, it's in your contract.
I fucking love that, Rhys.
I'm like, if you're not having fun, no, I tell you, like we check in with my staff and like we have this game that we play. We say, out of 10, right? We say, what's your number today, right? Now, this is very important. Your number, so 10 is like you are the best you've ever been ever, right? Like you're at peak, like amazing. 0 is like, you're the worst, right? We always check in. What's your number? Now, the rule of thumb here is that if you're at a 5 or below, that becomes the work. I don't want to do business until my clan, my mob, are at least at a 5, average or above. Okay, because that's the work that we need to do.
Love that.
You know what I mean? And that requires it to be fun, engaging, exciting. Last thing I ever want is for people to come in and be like, just have to do work, and they're like, they don't feel good about it. You know.
And it's, I mean, not that it all comes back to productivity at the end of the day, but it does at the end of the day impact your bottom line too, right? Because if you're happy and enjoying stuff, you're going to come up with new ideas. You're going to be a better collaborator. I love all of this so much, Rhys, because you're talking to someone who takes joy very fucking seriously. And I learned that from my dad, who is someone who like has always taken joy seriously and invested in experiences and happiness and those sort of things. It's interesting, the numbers thing. So my husband Dan and I, during lockdown when things were pretty bleak, did a similar exercise. So every day we would say, where's your number? Same thing, out of 10.
Okay.
Because the idea being, if we were collectively a 10, that was okay. And on days where, like, say we were both at a 9, fuck yeah, awesome. Maybe we can go and do something for someone else that day. We've got energy to spare. We can go and cook a meal for our friends and drop it on their doorstep. Yeah. But if he's at a 2 and I'm at a 2, then exactly that is the work for the day. But it's useful to know, because if he's at a 2 and I'm at an 8, it's like, cool, like I've got us today.
Yeah.
Like I can carry you a bit today. Like you can lean on me today. But if you're sitting there and you're both at 2s and you don't know that, you're like, well, why the fuck aren't they carrying me? Yeah. Don't they know I'm a 2? Yeah. But they're never going to know that if you don't have those conversations.
Yeah, you get it. Yeah, you get it. Yeah.
So did you have that conversation at work? Did you say every day?
Mostly every day. Well, okay, so logistically it's different, like, because like every day is different, right? So like on some days it'll just be me and Emma, and that's it. On other days it might be me, Emma, and then like one other staff, and like we still haven't it's very different logistically. But I'd say even if it's just me and Emma, most days, if not all, we'll check in on each other and like, what's your number? We also do what's your colour?
Ooh.
This is quantity and quantitative and qualitative. Colour. So the number system is like it's a mental exercise and it's a check-in.
Yeah.
The colour system doesn't mean it doesn't have to apply to a specific thing. It's like, what colour are you today? And it's like, let me just, you know what? I'm like right now I'm like a yellow sparkly yellow. And it's like, what does that mean? No, don't ask that question. It doesn't matter what it means.
I love
what it
this
is, right?
so
So
much.
we got dimensions to this shit.
I was just sitting here like, this is completely my jam.
Yeah.
Like just an intuitive, like I'm just a green, and that's it. That's all.
Whatever, and it doesn't have to mean anything.
Use that as you
I
will.
love that.
Like, that's. Did you? Not just specifically these exercises, but could you talk a bit about your background and how you got into this work? Because you speak incredibly articulately. You've got a very beautiful turn of phrase and way of describing things, and way of also bringing kind of visual elements and metaphors and analogies to really make things so accessible and just immediately understandable. How did you find your way to this?
Oh, that's so funny. Oh man. Okay. This is always a hard question. I'm like, where do I start? Okay, I'll tell you what. I'll go very beginning, right? I'll tell you a secret now. I'm whispering. When I was a very young child, I was the opposite of this. I was so scared. I was scared of everything, right?
Really?
And like it was a real problem, right? Because like when I went to school, for example, when I was young, like year 1 or like pre-primary, it's like, you know how you used to have assemblies and that?
Mm-hmm.
I was the one kid that was too much for me. I couldn't even be in the assembly. Like I actually was Mrs. Beecham, my year 1 teacher. She was a beautiful lady because she would like, you know how it's like all the kids are sitting down, but then like you got the rows of teachers that sort of on the sides there.
Mm-hmm.
And then like I would be the one that's like sitting with my teacher holding her hand.
Oh, really?
Because it was so scary, man. Like everybody's so scary. And like even talking, not necessarily publicly, but like even just the people was scary for me, right? So this was like scared, very scared child. Growing up, I get to like high school and I realized that it's like, I actually really like performing. Like I like performing. I have this thing where I'm like, I love making people feel like happy. And I'm like, however that looks, right? Like now it's manifested into like workshops and training and like things. But like back in this time, it was like through like the school musicals and all that kind of thing. And like I was the guy. And so I was like, through a natural organic process, I just liked doing the thing, you know? And then I went and studied for a bit after school, I went to WAPA, and I think you mob over, you got NIDA. WAPA is the Western Australian Academy of Performing Arts. It's acting, right? So I did acting. I did a certificate for in the Aboriginal theatre there. So now I'm like, oh, this is how I can do the thing on stage, but more like in a theatrical sense. And then since then, it's been like, that's when Aboriginal education comes in, because it's like, that's again meaningful to me. It was something that was an opportunity for me. I was working at the school that I was a high school student at. So I went to the high school and then I worked there as the Aboriginal Islander Educational Officer. So I'm like, cool, now I'm getting there. And then from there, it's been a series of then from there, did 4 years there. I then went into working for this organisation. At the time, it was called the Australian Indigenous Mentoring Experience. It was called AIM. It's a mentoring program. And this was a good opportunity because what it started to do was started to fuse the Aboriginal education with the presenting, right? Because now what I'm doing is that I'm at a university and we've got Aboriginal kids coming from different schools. I've hired and recruited student volunteers from the campus, and then I present the content. So now I'm like, cool, I'm operating because I'm doing the Aboriginal education, which I love, but I'm also now doing like the performing and the presenting, the facilitating that I love. And then from there, it was like, it's kind of, then a bunch of different things that I did still within Aboriginal education. Then I got to the point where it was like me and Emma had acknowledged this. She's doing her thing, I'm doing my thing. We got together, literally, we're like, had a few wines and we're like, acknowledgement of the country, that's interesting. Because she's from the States, right? She's American, she come over here. We're having the same sort of conversation. It's like, oh, we should explore this conversation to more people. Okay, good. Boom, Zoom calls and now in-person trainings, and now it is what it is today. So there you go. That's the growth.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's really powerful, I think, being and speaking to anyone with such a strong sense of purpose in what they do. I think it's remarkable. I think being around that, it's very inspiring.
Cheers.
Can you so you mentioned Emma a few times, your business partner, beautiful Emma. I'd love if you wouldn't mind telling us a bit more about like how you guys met and that like conversation over a couple of wines that became now a thing that you're rolling out. I mean, it looks like you guys are fucking everywhere every other week doing huge trainings and I mean, I will say this to anyone who talks to me for more than 10 minutes. I'm like, you got to do this acknowledgement training. It's the best piece of professional development I've ever done in my life. I've said those words, I reckon, 100 times because it's absolutely true. Because at the time, I was the president of Graphic Recorders Australia and we had a monthly lunch and learn thing. So I'd always be hosting that. And now I host a monthly breakfast event, Creative Mornings as well. Yeah. So those things, just that little bit of permission, I guess, is what it felt like unlocking something to play with it a little bit more has been so impactful for me. Anyway, I digress. Just giving you some more compliments.
Can I add to that though? Having been at Jessamy at Creative Mornings, when you do the acknowledgement of country, you've got a really beautiful way of weaving in the seasons that is so a testament to clearly an excellent workshop, but connecting to the land and time as well. I think like really contextualizing, and even just the idea of seasons where something, and this is embarrassing to admit, this is not good, but I'm saying it out loud, is it blew my mind arriving in Australia and realizing that there are a different number of seasons in Aboriginal culture.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, God, of course, like a season is a construct. Why on earth? It's not objectively true that there are 4 seasons.
It's it's the 1st of July.
Yeah, right. But it just revealed to me as someone who's, thought or tried to fucking think for myself and think critically and whatever. But like we all have these massive blind spots where we inherit culture and there are huge pieces of things that we don't question. So referring to a different seasonal mindset is like not only are you connecting to people, to land, to culture, to time, but you're also on like a meta level showing that there's an entire different like framework of thought on the world, right?
Yeah. So like they call that dogma, and they say the biggest dogma ever established culturally speaking is like the calendar, like the Gregorian calendar. Like nobody and dogma is like, I'm going to butcher this as well, but it's like it's like unquestioned. It's an unquestioned belief system because it works, right? And so it's like that isn't a very well established dogmatic thing is the Gregorian calendar. If it's Wednesday, it's fucking Wednesday.
You could hook someone up to a lie detector test and they'd be like, yeah, it's April.
Yeah.
And they'd be telling the truth because no part of them questions the concept of April.
And that's why I think it's exciting because like I've heard that many times where people go, oh, there's interest. It's interesting and the seasons are great because not only is it a different framework, like you said, of like of a system that's at play, but it's also unique to like the different places in Australia. So I know you like how many seasons the 100 country?
7.
You got 7. Cool. We got 6.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, but I think the same thing's happening where it's like, it's a different perspective of something that it's not like it's in competition with winter. It's not like it's either winter or macaroon in Noongar, I think it was. It's like, it's just a different perspective. Exactly. And that's why people go, yeah. That's what I love as well, because it's not like it's either one or the other.
It's richer for having both. They offer different information and different feelings and different responses.
Yeah. And that's why people that's why like some people will be like, it's not Nam, it's Melbourne. It's not Melbourne, it's Nam. And you do this thing again, and it's like, no, it's both. But again, it's about perspective, right? So, I love that. But now coming back to because that's where we went from.
Yes.
Yeah, we've gone from.
Yes. So I just wanted to, well, we've taken a little roundabout, but that is the nature of this whole podcast, Rhys, as you are coming to learn.
Should have bought two bottles.
Yeah. So how everything started with Emma, because I think it's a really interesting thing, her coming from overseas and coming like similarly to what you were saying, Alison, being like, well, what is this whole thing? Like, what is the welcome thing? What is the acknowledgement? What is the difference? yeah, so I'd just love to hear a bit more about like how the whole thing started beyond the like chat over a glass of wine.
We met at a house party, as you do.
Did you?
Met at a house party. And back then I had braids, you know, like I had the long braids and that. And like she knew who I was. I think we met maybe once before that, like briefly sort of thing. And she come up to me and she's like, "Oh, Rhys, I love your braids, mate. Like, tell me more about that. Is that like a traditional Aboriginal, you know, like thing that you mob do, you know?" And I was like, "No, you seen that show Vikings?" I'm like, "I'm going for the Ragnar Lothbrok look, baby, you know?" That's how it started. People ask her. She's like, how did you meet like an Aboriginal person? And it's like, no, literally that. Like just hanging out, you're talking. And then we started having a conversation. And then it was a very organic thing where it was like, where we kind of overlap is, so she's a change strategist, right? So she's invested in change. She's working in campaigns and worked on the Obama campaign. She travels a lot and moved around a lot. And this was interesting to me because at this time in my life, up until this point, I'd only really had like 2 jobs, right? I'm a creature of habit, right? I'm a homebody, right? So it's like I was working at my school and then I was working for AIM. And in my mind, it was like this thing of like, for me to do work, it's like lock onto somebody else's body of work that I like doing. And that was fine at the time. And then I think like through a very organic and natural conversation with Emma, I started realizing like, it's kind of around that time, I was like, oh, okay, like I can just do what I want. Like, okay, like you can do that, right? There's a thing called an ABN, you know, and I realized that she was very independent herself. And then naturally, like a lot of the work that she does, which overlaps with me in the facilitation and the cultural space, I was like, oh, there's an osmosis, there's a compatibility here. And then just through natural conversations, similar to how we're doing it now, it's like this is an interesting point of conversation. And she's the very process brain of like, how do we now make it a thing? Which is because I wouldn't have done that otherwise, right? Like she's the one who's like, how do we make this?
Oh God, everyone needs.
Okay, I see it's similar.
So like to meet a human that works that way is a true gift.
Blessing. Blessing.
Yeah, honestly,
because it's like otherwise I'd still be doing like probably working for someone, you know. But again, so it was really just it was an organic conversation. We found a topic of discussion that's a lot of people have questions about because again, like for every Australian, it's the same thing. It's just the thing that you do with the thing. And it's like, how do we now provide context to that? Or how do we now make that fun? How do we make that exciting? So that's how we started it. And then it's eventually manifested to what it is today. So we've just recently trained over 16,000 Australians.
Wow.
16,000. We're going for 50.
That's amazing.
That's incredible.
Congratulations.
It's very exciting for that. Yeah.
What has running these workshops, has anything changed for you as a result of teaching that many people and interacting with that many people? Like, are there things that have surprised you or that have changed even within the cultural climate as you're working?
Yes and no. Like there's so many yeses and so many nos. Like the cultural, how do I say this? The fear stays the same. There's always the same. I get the same questions, and it's the same. The how people consider the topic is the same, but at the same time, the variables change over time. So, like over time, culturally speaking, it's like how do I explain this? Like right now, if you think of acknowledgement of country, the standard script, the standard words, right now there's new phenomenons that exist within that now I'm getting more questions about, right? So for example, I'm getting more questions now about people asking about emerging elders. Have you heard this?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have got this as much, let's say 3 years ago, let alone 10 years ago when I was doing the script myself, right? Because it becomes this question that people start asking and it's like, is that so culture, like it ebbs and flows, like the cult within the cultural phenomenon of like in this context, the acknowledgement of country. Also like it's becoming more and more of a phenomenon of like, again, every single speaker, the dominoing effect, like that's more of a thing that's happening more often. Again, and then I get the questions about it. So like yes and no.
Yeah.
This is just a slight sidetrack, but I think the funny thing about that domino effect thing, right, becomes like if there are 5 speakers on a bill and speakers 1, 2, and 3 do it, then if you're speaker 4, you're like, well, fuck, now I have to. If that's become the thing, then I look like the dickhead if I'm not the one who
don't do it.
Who does
Exactly
it?
what's happening.
I'm like, why do you hate Aboriginal people so much?
Speaker 4. What skeletons do you have in your closet?
But it's anyway. But I wanted to kind of building on that from like your experience of doing this work, and you kind of touched on it a little while ago, is that so you're the guy, you're the face. It's like I am the Aboriginal educator guy. And I imagine that comes with some element of pressure, right? So what has that been like for you? And, you know, the incredible and increasingly loose premise of this podcast is around imposter syndrome. But is that a thing that's come up for you since doing this work as it's become more and more public, and with your 16,000, soon to be 50,000 trainees? I'd just love to hear a bit about your like personal experience of that.
So like you're asking what?
I'm asking in your experience of being the face of this and the pressure that would come with that. Like, have you sort of experienced any, I don't know, like doubts around that yourself, or like how do you manage that?
Most of it, and I think this is kind of a reflection of the fears that most people have, is that like most of it's in my head a lot of time.
Yeah.
Like it's like you try to be the most culturally correct individual, especially when you're working in my field of Aboriginal education. The biggest fear is always like, you don't want to be stepping on other people's toes culturally. Now, that word culturally is also very hard to define, because there's different cultures specifically with different, you know, protocols, rules, and regulations. So, but again, I'm not, let's say, for example, it would be a very different conversation if I was in the welcome to country game. If I was a person who was, you know, if I was very specific, because again, that's a traditional cultural protocol. I'm not, I'm with the acknowledgement of country, which is again simply the acknowledgement of people in place. So it reduces a lot of risk. That being said, like anything, it's like the more work that like inevitably you always come up against a bit of friction of people. Some people might say, you know, well, who you get like imposters, like who's Rhys to be running this on and politically on this country with these people and this, and like it's a small amount of that, you know. People also like question my identity, and I actually don't have a problem with it, because like, look at me, you know what I mean? Like, you know, I'm a very white person, you know? And people will say like, is he Aboriginal, that kind of thing. And like, it's nothing I can, if they'll have that conversation with me, it's like, well, I can explain that. But again, these are conversations I observe from other people telling me, or if it's online or something like that. And there's a questioning nature of like, who is this person to be doing this thing? But ultimately, there's no huge political issues, I don't think, that people have had with me specifically. If there is, I don't know about it. People haven't spoken to me about it. But I always say, like, I'm always in the branch of cultural safety. I always simply, the best way I can navigate that is just invite people to talk to me about it. Like, what am I doing that's not culturally appropriate? Because I'll pivot then. Like, I'll be able to change the way who I am depending upon the respectful nature of the culture that exists in that place or within these people or whatever that is. That's the best you can do.
Yeah.
That's the best you can do. Yeah.
I think that like the concept of cultural safety, I think, is something that you hear more and more. I certainly do. Like people talking about it within workplaces, or some of the clients that I work with might be like health services, that kind of a thing. What does that mean for somewhere to be culturally safe?
I'm still trying to figure that out, to be honest with you. I look on a broad level, on a generalized level, I think it's like you've got to be very general here, otherwise, because it becomes too specific. It's like you've got the modern culture, okay? You've got the modern culture of who we are and business and what we do. And then you've got, let's say, for example, outside of modern cultures. In my world, you've got the traditional cultures. Maybe for somebody else, it might be like, culture from a different country or a different background, different religion, that kind of thing. And I think the overall premise of cultural safety is that of a good, well-intended idea, which is the idea it's like, here we are as the modern culture and we're surrounded by, our culture, but we of course want to make sure and be conscious of the idea that bringing people in from, say, other cultures, in my case, traditional culture in Australia, in somebody else's case could be from Bangladesh or wherever it is, religiously, how do we make that accommodating? Right. Mm-hmm. So on a very broad level, I think that it has an important role to play. It's because it invokes the idea of like just being consciously aware of the dominant majority culture and how do we accommodate, and not only accommodate, but actively include multiple diverse ideas and constructs to the wider culture. Right. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what cultural safety on a larger, broader scale means. Mm-hmm. I think that the challenge is when people try to make things too safe, right? Where it's like the rules that are set in place within this culture, wherever it is, whatever business or organization, it's so specific that it so people then, anybody that's coming in has to like play this mental game about like, what words do I use and how do I act? And it's like you forget that you're just kind of a person that's being, instead of you just being a person that's coming there, you're now like this construction of like, oh, I can't say this and I can't do that and I can't say this. And then funny enough, ironically, it becomes an unsafe space because then everybody's playing this game where you've got guns next to your heads. Yeah. And you're like, hello. Yes. Hi. How are you? And it's like, and I think, so there's a balance here. And I try to find out what that balance is and how we can not make it not safe, but remind people of the inherent nature of the original idea of simply just including people into the wider majority culture that we exist in.
Yeah.
What would you say, like what is, I've got a couple of directions that I want to ask, but I think you obviously are doing this work that is so people-led, so heart-led, so important relationally and culturally, as we were saying. But now you're also moving into a space where you're also a business owner for the first time. Mm-hmm. Like, what is that like? How has that journey been? Because it feels like it's a completely different set of skills, right? Like, how is that journey?
I love that you asked me that. I appreciate that you asked me that. I ask myself that quite a lot. I make it up as I go, to be honest. And like, but funny enough, I think that's kind of the advantage that I've got, right? Because I'm not I didn't have to go to a business school. And I can understand how like that could be very beneficial for some people, but it's never been what I've done, right? I've naturally sort of fell into this place of going like, oh, this is and a lot of that has to do with Emma as well, because she's somebody who does think like that and does think long term and does plan and strategize. In a lot of ways, I just rock up and look good. Okay, I do provide a lot more value than that. Okay, I do, but like, that's how I align myself. Right at this point in time, it's like my biggest. I'm really considering not like being the business owner, but more so being a leader in my business. That's the way I'm framing my approach within my space, right? Because a business owner, in my mind, like when you say that label, like it's like I have like spreadsheets in my head for some example.
Yeah,
like,
it doesn't land. It doesn't land culture, in a good place.
I mean, like it's like how much tax am I paying? Like, because I hire someone to do that. So a better question for me in this context, I think, is like, who am I as a leader? And that's what I'm doing at the moment, because I'm like, I can be just like Rhys, who's a good mate and like happy and like doing the thing with people who so happen to be my staff. But I'm really trying to reframe this into like, but what does a leader actually do in this position? How do I lead the team as opposed to just show up as Rhys? You know what I mean? So I think that's more how I'm considering your question or my place in the role of the business leader,
And sort of building on that, like, what do you have an idea of what success would and will look like for your business? You mentioned 50,000.
Oh.
Your 50,000 goal in terms of
I think it comes in so many different. There's not one answer for that. You know, like, yeah, I mean, every day getting there, like, look, it's a success if I get there and everybody's above a 5. In some way, that's a success. It's going to be a big success when we reach 50,000, right? It's going to be a success. It's always a success when, like, Kim, my programs manager, is like, oh, we just got this sale. Like, it's every day is a bit of a success, depending. So yeah, that's a hard one. I can't say like I'm successful when we've reached $40 million and we've hired 18 staff, and it's like.
I suppose it's also like a question of impact as well. I mean, those 50,000 people, it's not, you know, there's that as a business metric, but those 50,000 people go home and have families and have conversations and tell their friends about it. So there's also a very important sense of impact as well.
And then there's that angle too. Yeah, exactly. Like in my mind, I'm like, if I do a training with 10 people, it's like in my mind, I'm like, if I've made one person smile and consider something differently in that 2 hours, then that's a success for me. That is. So it's who you work with as well, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
I love the way you frame your role in that as thinking about it as being a leader rather than a business owner. And I think, like, I totally agree. I think there's a lot of advantage to, like, not being experienced in a thing when you come into it, because you don't have to unlearn all of the unhelpful stuff that you like. So say you'd come from being like a serial entrepreneur who'd set up a what a fancy business people do. A phone company? That's the best thing I can think of. I don't fucking know.
A phone company.
Oh, just one of those small businesses, you know, like a phone company.
Suddenly revealing that I am 75 years old.
And they're like, I've got a phone company.
Mark Telstra. Wait a second.
Anyway, I think there's a lot of benefit, like there, you know, and something we talk a lot about is the sort of like the kind of potentially scary nature of jumping into something as a beginner that you're not experienced in. But there are challenges that come with that, but there are so many benefits in like not knowing, like you've got to have fun in your contract. You know what I mean? Like that sort of stuff is the thing that you get from approaching something from your own lens with your own experience rather than the experience that feels relevant to being the leader of a business.
Yeah. And like, I think people have like, the culture that we live in is like, there's a heavy emphasis on like the top-down approach, you know, like top-down culture versus bottom-up, you know, and like, and I fell into it myself. And it's the same thing with me, literally, until I met Emma. It was like I committed unconsciously to the idea of like the only way to have success or to be somebody of importance or to have impact is to commit to the idea of like the top-down approach, meaning like I go into somebody else's already established culture. And it's like, cool, that's not a bad thing. That's good. That does work for a lot of people. Some people just, so I know my best mate, his girlfriend is like, she loves, I'm like, I don't know how, but it's like she's like, I want to be at a computer and I want to speak to people and I just want to like do admin. I'm like, why? But again, everybody's different, right? Yeah. Everybody likes to just be a part of that. But I think like what I really like the idea of is that I'm really playing with it at the moment again, like similar to me as the leader. It's not like, how do I uphold an already pre-established cultural of how like I am a business owner, but how do I as Rhys from the bottom up create change from what I already know is valuable and meaningful to me? Like, you know?
Yeah. Bring your Rhysness. Your resuscity.
My resources.
Yeah.
My respect. It's an irresistible, you know.
Shit. If that's not in your byline of your Instagram profile by the time you leave here, I'm going to be sorely disappointed.
It's on my number plate. Respect is my number plate.
Oh.
Yeah, I got a few of them.
So good.
I'm like, we definitely need a second bottle of wine.
We're running out.
Well, we're sort of unfortunately around about time to wrap up, I'm afraid, but I feel like I could keep talking to you forever and a day. But maybe as a way of kind of wrapping up, when people, I'm sure you get this question all the time, what's the one thing, if you had like just the one bit of advice you could give to someone? It doesn't necessarily have to be around acknowledgements, but maybe it's around like how to, what's the word we're using? Desensitize their lives a little bit, like to alleviate a bit of fear.
Or I just remind people, I'm like, just understand that like it sounds cliche. It sounds cliche, but it's very true. It's like, just understand that like you got more power than you think. You've got more power than you think, okay? And whatever that looks like, I can't be the guy to find that. You've got to find that within yourself. That sounds cliche. But if we're going into more specific in the world that I work in, I always encourage people to just research your local language. It's very easy, right? Like you don't have to go and close all the gaps in complete reconciliation next week, right? I just go, right, just go read. I'm like, find out where you are, where your country is, find what the traditional name for that, and just find out a little bit more about that and then share that along, right? And I always start with the language. I think the language is always really cool. And it also gives an opportunity for us as Australians here to share, but also to connect to, not just the words that are being said, the language, but also the culture that lies beneath it or underneath it or alongside it, And I do this because half of me is like, because I have this friendly rivalry with New Zealand. And I'm like, I kind of want us to get to New Zealand's point where I can walk around and like you can see the language and everywhere, and it's like a part of who they are. And I'm like, no, I think we're getting there, but that's not up to me. That's up to you. That's up to everybody, Yeah. So yeah, that's the best advice that I can give.
That's so, Rhys, you've been incredibly, incredibly generous, and I know my mind is already swimming and in this excited way of like I can't wait for our next episode where we will be acknowledging and reflecting on the place that we're at, the people, and the work you do is incredibly important, basically. Thanks. Is what I'm trying to say. And thank you for your time here.
Oh, you're very welcome. And what an honor to be. And this was so random, right? Like it was.
That's our brand.
The stars aligned in such an incredible way. Like I something just clicked the thought. Like, oh fuck, Rhys would be such a, because we know each other a little bit through illustration work and graphic recording stuff. And I was like, oh man, Rhys would be such a great guest on the podcast. And sent you a message, and then you're like, oh, I was just looking at your book, and then you just happened to be going to Melbourne.
Be in Melbourne in 2 days. See you then.
Yeah. So it couldn't have worked out more perfectly, and we were meant to be here having this chat. Yeah. So thanks so much.
It's so much fun.
Such a joy.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Cheers.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
And this is where you like edit out, like put music and whatever.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to the Imposter Syndrome Club. Please follow us wherever you find your podcasts. And if you're feeling extra kind, rate and review. Or if you got any insights or value from this, share with a friend.
You can also find us on Instagram @ImposterPod or online at impostersyndromeclub.com.